Welcome to Pontoon Reimagine Now. I'm your host, Shannon Robertson, and today we're honored to have Dr. Julie Hwang with us, a distinguished expert in the naturopathic medicine, whose work is revolutionizing the integration of wellness within the corporate sphere. Dr. Julie's rich background bridges conventional and Eastern medicine, creating a comprehensive wellness approach that challenges and extends beyond the usual scope of corporate wellness programs. With a holistic arsenal that includes nutritional counseling, herbal medicine, lifestyle adjustments, and advanced testing, Dr. Julie is dedicated to unlocking the body's inherent healing potential. But her expertise doesn't stop with individual wellness. Dr. Julie is equally passionate about translating these principles into the corporate success, offering tailored solutions that boost productivity and performance by fostering workplace well-being. Her conviction in the synergy between professional performance and personal wellness advocates for a more encompassing approach to the health in the workplace. As we dive into our conversation today, we'll explore Dr. Julie's innovative approach to marrying naturopathic wellness and professional excellence. Her insights promise not just a pathway to a healthier workforce, but also to a more adaptable and thriving organization. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Julie to Pontoon Reimagine Now. Dr. Julie, we're thrilled to have you and look forward to uncovering some of your secrets to achieving both personal health and business success without compromise.
Thanks so much, Shannon. It's nice to be here.
So we'll dive right in. Could you share with us how naturopathic medicine's foundational principles can be applied to improve wellness in the workplace?
Yeah, I'd love to. That's a great question. Some of the foundational principles of, any profession I think are really important and they're important to me because they seem to apply. I think principles should apply to all aspects of life. They should be sort of true throughout all of life. And in medicine and healthcare practices, the science, the research, the knowledge, the tools that we have, they really evolve. They change regularly with the changes in evidence, with research. But the philosophy and the principles, I think, of how we apply what we do know and the integrity that we have to stick to those principles shouldn't change. So one of the major and first principles that we always start with is to identify and address the root cause. This is discovered via good assessment, diagnosis, even a really good intake, personal medical histories, going through, someone's story, what they've experienced, and trying to figure out, well, not just what's going on, but why is it happening? How are those organs functioning? How can we use the appropriate diagnostic assessments or even assessment tools to really figure out, well, what's going on here? What's the root cause? So that's the first principle that we work with. Another one in the naturopathic medicine field is to treat the whole person. And, this might sound obvious for a lot of people, thinking about naturopathic medicine, they think, oh, it's holistic. But treating the whole person can also be extended to beyond their personal symptoms. It can include the environment, their social environment. And this is sort of where it overlaps a little bit with corporate wellness, because in corporate wellness, we usually talk about those 4 pillars: financial, social, physical, and mental health. And so I think with the naturopathic or integrative medicine approach, we can address a few of these things in individual sessions, and these really complement a corporate wellness program as well. And then another principle that we have is education, they write the principles down in Latin. So they're docere, which means to teach in the classical Latin. I guess it would be docere in more medieval Latin. Not that people don't really care, but that's the root. That's the root of the word doctor. Right? The word doctor is actually teacher. And so it's a big principle in naturopathic medicine to educate around general wellness knowledge, but also their individual knowledge, how to read the cues that the body is sending. What are those symptoms telling us? And these are all things that what we try to do is translate so that the person in the body might know what's going on a little bit more. And then general wellness knowledge for people in the workplace, it has really expanded over the years. So I think this is great because, when people know more, then they can do more, and there's less stigma. They can kind of advocate for their own health in a lot of ways. And then, another major principle is prevention. Benjamin Franklin famously said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And this is a huge foundational principle that can really benefit people in the workplace, but in all businesses or a lot of nonprofits that I've worked with, wellness programs, or just in how we operate on a day-to-day. Prevention is really great because it creates more sustainable business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so two other things that I like to kind of keep in mind for myself in my work, is when I'm working either with patients or in a wellness setting, is to start with the idea that the patient is well. I think that's really important because, you know, if you're walking, talking, taking a shower in the morning, you're probably pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because, and I think it can be a lot more motivating for people because a lot of times we'll dive into the research and they'll think, oh no, I'm so sick.
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it's a lot more motivating if you think, actually, you're quite well. These are, if you weren't well, you wouldn't be waking up in the morning. You wouldn't be able to do these things because we can deal with people who are quite sick. And so reassuring people that the starting point they're at is, maybe above 50%, maybe they're at 70% and they're trying to go for 100. Then that might be a little less daunting to get started from,
I
if that
love
makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think that is a really great insight for people to apply across the board because you're right, we're not just starting at zero, and often we're never starting from zero. We're starting from a place that is higher, and so to get to that next level, it's not actually as challenging as we may perceive it to be before thinking about it, in the context that you just shared. So I really like that, that strategy.
Mhm.
What are some other preventative strategies that businesses could implement to support employee health from a naturopathic perspective?
Yeah, I mean that's also really a great question, and something that we want to think about from the beginning, because prevention is so different from disease treatment.
Hmm.
Like in the clinic, or when we see people coming in, they're usually quite kind of sick. And so we do want to work on a specific thing, but for businesses, um, we want to kind of switch the mindset from reactivity to taking a proactive approach or a preventative approach. And I'm sure you do this, and many business professionals are trying to do this on a lot of levels. So I can only really speak to the wellness field, but I usually suggest that the fundamentals of wellness are supported first. So those big blocks are sleep. You
Mm.
know, it's it's amazing what a good night's sleep can do for
Yeah.
people. The second one is really activity or movement level. And this a lot of people already know about. So, businesses can kind of uh, jump on that and create some fun events, challenges, things like this. And a lot of groups are already doing this. And then the third kind of major pocket is nutrition. And I like to use a lot of like food as medicine, and go back to the basics really
Hmm.
of that. So I usually think that like businesses can choose to tailor their corporate wellness programs to include these things, and they're probably already doing a lot of these things: the lunch and learns, the group health challenges, in these three specific categories. But another kind of big group category is stress management, because, and I think that prevention wise, stress management doesn't sound so preventative, right? It's like
Hmm.
someone is stressed and then we treat it
Right.
or we
Yeah.
manage it, right? But what would be a preventative way to approach that is to sort of talk about mental health uh, earlier on, and start to educate employees around, I think, what they have access to in terms of support. A lot of times they're not willing to be obviously vulnerable with their colleagues or in professional environments, and I think that's good. And I think a lot of companies have already set up EAP programs, or uh, not just group corporate programs, but have mental health therapy coverage, these kinds of things. And so, if there are ways to educate the employees around the not just the advantage of using those, but also demonstrating, the benefits of using those therapies or those avenues, that might be a low cost to them. Already covered under insurance. That's a great place to start. So I usually suggest that if businesses have the bandwidth or the support for mental health already there, that they should really emphasize that, because that will get people also over the hump of starting to invest in their own health, and well-being. And I really liked, actually, I think you were interviewing Dan, and he mentioned the well-being and engagement manager
Mm-hmm.
role.
Yeah.
And I think, having someone in dedicated roles like this is a great idea. And it really helps build that wellness culture that we find is needed in the workplace. Yeah. And so those are my ideas around prevention.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think you're right. The wellness manager is a great idea, because it can be someone who's not your direct manager, and maybe not in HR in the way that we normally attach going to HR for certain issues. So it's a bit of a safer person in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And you're right. I've seen a lot of companies starting to invest in these EAP programs. I haven't so much seen businesses really talking or promoting, sleep in the way that they do mental health. And so, but it's the first thing that you said, and it's the first thing that I think of when I think of, oh, my mind is sharper, I'm more rested, I'm less stressed when I've had a good night's sleep. So for
Mhm.
me, that kind of seems like the first thing that we should be approaching is the sleep hygiene, which is difficult now when we're on our screens all day long. I find sleep
Mhm.
hygiene is so hard to actually be able to achieve. So good things to think about. Um,
Yeah.
when you approach the mental and emotional aspects of workplace wellness, um, sort of what, or sorry, how does your approach, let me rephrase my question. How does your approach address the mental and emotional aspects of workplace wellness? And then why are some of these components critical?
That's a great question. I think my take is that mental and emotional aspects of workplace wellness could be broken down into two general categories, or directions, if you would go with me on that. So the idea would be that the first aspect is the impact of the workplace culture, that impact that workplace culture might have on one's mental health and
Hmm.
personal life. So what they take home with them. Sometimes we have employees who might choose, might have trouble finishing their work on time, and that might be something that adds to their personal stress and their personal life. And that it might end up their work might end up taking kind of a disproportionately larger amount of time out of their personal life than others. And the risk here is that this can be really unsustainable and costly in the long term if we don't uh, address sort of the bleed
Hmm.
of work of work into the personal life. And it's really important to work with employees on, boundary setting, but also time management. And it, from my perspective, I always try to look for, well, what's the root cause, what's the assessment that we need here. And so if there's something actually going on in terms of productivity or their own personal, like, diagnosable health issues that we can really work on, then we try to do that. And that can this is really critical, because
Mhm.
the biggest cost that we see around a lack of kind of attention to mental emotional aspects of work is when we get folks burnt out,
Mhm.
or going on disability, and there are large amounts of research on the actual costs, like the cost to increase health insurance costs or medical costs for the company. This is a big part of this one aspect. So I think that's why that's important. And then the opposite is also true, where a lot of times in the workplace we might see someone not being able to manage their mental emotional health at home, or there's a number of issues going on at home,
Mhm.
rightfully so. There's a lot of hard times
Mhm.
in the last few years, especially post pandemic. Huge amounts of personal stress, isolation, low
Yeah.
mental health resource, and so when we start to see cues of that coming into the workplace, then there's also ways that we can sort of support and address that. And I think it's critical that we do that, because without the tools to self-regulate emotions or mental health, then we're not really able to perform at our best in our job. And a lot of times people really want to.
Mhm.
Um, they want to be able to do that. They like what they do, and so the way to support that would be through workplace culture.
It reminds me a little bit of that ripple effect. Like I was reading an article months ago now, but it reminds me of this article where, I come in and I'm having a bad day and I'm talking to you and I kind of snap at you and then you have a bad day because of my reaction, but I've brought something from home. So I think
Mhm.
being able to manage, like you said, your personal and professional stressors is important because it then may not just affect your day, but also those around you.
Mhm.
And then it goes on and on and on. So the ripple effect or the canary syndrome or symptoms are good to look out for.
Yeah,
Um,
and mhm. Yeah, that's a great example. I mean, the ripple effect is, you know, especially in
prominent.
larger groups. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really
Yeah,
prominent. Yeah.
exactly. When you're introducing some of these wellness programs into corporate settings, are there specific challenges that, or themes and challenges that you kind of go through when implementing, and how, if there are, how do you overcome them?
Yeah, for sure. It when we try to bring something, like, whether we're approached, sometimes we're approached by a group, to do something in there, whether it's a talk, a one-off, things like this. Um, or it could be a full program for implementing a full program with the HR team. I think one of the biggest challenges is that everyone's at a different stage a
Mm.
little bit,
Hmm.
even like within the group. So management might want to have, this kind of regular program, but to get all of the employees on the same page, it's challenging, because there's a diverse backgrounds. A lot of people might even have a health background. They might be
Yeah.
really well trained, already know this stuff. And think, and then other folks, it might be just kind of a cultural background thing. We tried to implement, I can give you an example. One time we tried to bring in, we were asked to do massages for a group, but culturally, some of the people weren't comfortable with that,
Right.
with
Yeah.
touch therapy, and so we had to think of another way to engage with those folks. And in order to do that, then we, checked in culturally. It was an East Asian culture, Korean group. So then, okay, well, we decided to do ear acupuncture. It's a lot
Mm.
less invasive. It's non-diagnostic. There's research on it, to help regulate that fight or flight nervous system,
Hmm.
and they're a little bit more open to it, things like that. So I think that's the thing, is that everyone's at a different stage. Another s- solution to this problem is the sort of catch more flies with honey approach.
Hmm.
Like, we don't make anything mandatory, and we try to give 2 to 3 options for the employee's choice when we're implementing a program, so that they don't feel obligated, to do one thing or another. They might be already like a sports superstar, you know, like a near professional athlete. So they may not want any kind of fitness support. So that's one way around it.
Yeah.
And we can do that because if you have broader teams that you're working with. So a lot of times you're working with, okay, let's partner a large interdisciplinary group of practitioners with a company, and that's something else. And then there's another challenge that we see is kind of like the motivation for wellness. So it's similar to diversity in terms of diverse backgrounds and the different stages, but it's actually a bit trickier because some people can be almost very triggered by
Right.
by extrinsic motivation environments. So where there's badges and rewards, coming up in a really high achievement background, some people actually get really triggered emotionally, and they don't want to participate, and they kind of push that away. They feel like it's, not for them. And so we have to have a mix of intrinsic motivation, things where people, again, choice, where they can come to it and say, I want to learn and pick the things that work for me. And these people tend to be more self-motivated, but they don't want the possibility of judgment, sharing with their colleagues. Whereas other folks really benefit from having the accountability partners,
Yeah.
the group challenge. So,
that's really interesting. And I can see differences even just with the teams that I've been on, and how some would really benefit from being able to earn a badge. And then others would do the push away. They're kind of triggered by that. So I bet that's hard to balance, especially when you have these different types of personalities within one team.
We use a lot of gamification strategy to try to make it appealing, like fun. Because the gamification, when you're making games, it's all about balancing intrinsic motivation with extrinsic. Yeah.
Right.
And looking for what we call easy onboarding.
Yeah.
What's the first step, Is it easy? It's got to be unbelievably easy.
Yeah. And onboarding too. I mean, it's always one of the first and most important principles when bringing someone into a company or into a new program, is making sure that the onboarding is kind of smooth and seamless. So do you find that it's very easy to engage employees to participate actively in naturopathic wellness programs?
Oh, that's a good question. I think so. I think definitely, like, I don't know about easy, but it could be, we have a method. And I think we engage employees through a combination of methods by introducing both the individual coaching aspects and the group programs. And then we try to create a couple entry points. We talked about onboarding, similar to that. What are 3 or 4 different, I would say I try to limit it to 3. What are 3 different ways in which you can engage with this program? And then we set up a timeline over a defined period with actual metrics, or some kind of desired change or goal. We use SMART goal settings, technique. Everyone uses SMART goals.
Yeah.
But in wellness, sometimes it's a nebulous thing. They're like, is it even attainable? Is it even possible? And so we really have to combine the approach. And I think the individual one-on-ones are a great aspect of that. Once we kind of launch a program, we try to have check-ins. And so that's a big way that we can increase engagement. And we'll probably get a decent amount of engagement for the duration of the program. And what's great, I think, is that after programs, a lot of people want to continue working with those folks they were working with. And so they might get a little bit more out of it than someone else. But you never know, because years later, someone might knock on her door and be like, "Hey, I saw you at this thing, and I it's been 5 years ago," or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that, I mean, it depends how you measure engagement. But I really just want people to be healthy in their lives and happy and well. And I think people come to it when they're ready.
So could you discuss, or are there some specific holistic tools or techniques that you have found are particularly effective in the corporate environment?
Yeah, I would definitely have to say meditation is almost surprisingly effective, and great bang for buck. It's probably the easiest, most flexible, low equipment
Hmm.
program or thing you could implement in a group. And um, it can be really short. It can be almost as short as a minute, a couple minutes. I'll give you an example. I worked with a group for years, and they had a lot of late meetings, and so a lot of people would kind of come in after full days of work and bring everything with them, and like we
Hmm.
talked about before, put it on each other.
Hmm.
And these meetings ended up getting really long and unproductive. And so we started bringing in a 1 to 5 minute silent meditation just at the beginning of the meeting. And honestly, a lot less time wasted. People are much more collaborative, open. Uh, that funny feeling you have when you're sitting there awkwardly, just getting your position. That's the first 30 seconds. And then we might put on something like a guided meditation. Progressive muscle relaxation is one that I really like, because it's like a body scan, so it gets you in the body,
Mm.
out of the head. And yeah, this is one that this technique is a tiny amount of investment time wise, and you get huge results. And I think a big difference in terms of the quality of group work. And another tool I would have to advocate for now, and technique that I think is more and more needed in the corporate environment, is more individualized health coaching. um, the walls are down when you're in private confidential setting. You're a little bit more able to be a bit more vulnerable.
Hmm.
And a good coach, this is different than having a doctor around or something like that. A good coach should be able to identify that low hanging fruit pretty relatively quickly.
Hmm.
um, and I'm pretty biased towards health coaching, because you can kind of go for a big picture view,
Hmm.
and you can say, you need this, and this. And I'm not necessarily going to be the one to do it, but
Right.
but I can help you identify that and get you organized so that you have a health plan and you build your health team over the next 3 to 6 months. And I think that would be particularly helpful for people who are already quite knowledgeable. People in the corporate environment already know a lot,
Hmm.
about, they've been looking up exercises and
Yeah.
good diets and things like this. They know a lot, so they really just need to be put in touch with those resources. Like I said, low hanging fruit. And so I think that can help, because then you can get on track with, we talked about sleep earlier. So
Hmm.
even just knowing that there are sleep studies available, you know, or that they could work with a sleep medicine doctor, or they could, so just getting those factors organized really helps.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I would say.
No, I think you're right. And meditation for me has helped me focus. So often when I feel like I can't, there's a piece of work that is kind of just dragging on. For me, the real benefit for meditation has been not so much that I let go of what else is happening in my day, but so that it helps me to feel grounded, like you said, but focus. It has helped me a lot when I think about how I apply it in a work setting. Um, Looking ahead, how do you anticipate the landscape of corporate wellness evolving? Are there trends that you think we should be aware of?
Oh, for sure. There's a couple things that we're seeing a lot of, especially post-pandemic. We're seeing a big need for more, I think, integrative and holistic ways to support mental health.
Hmm.
Um, and people are starting to recognize it from a functional medicine perspective. This is, a big part of our work. The premise of it is the gut-brain axis. So connecting the mind and the gut, the digestion, like we talked about just before.
Hmm.
So I think, but bringing in this multiple ways to support mental health, I think that's going to be necessary moving forward. We're starting to already see, a very different performance level for people post pandemic. Like we haven't, it has. I don't think it's really bounced back, um, and and we need solutions. I think there there's also kind of this age of health tech and wearables, and people have a lot of data.
Hmm.
So I see corporate wellness sort of pushing, or wellness programs really pushing to integrate that data into practical solutions
Mm.
for folks, and within the lens of mental health. I think that's a big one.
That's really interesting. Speaking of, I'm wearing mine, my Fitbit. How do you see the relationship between an employee's health and their professional performance? And do you see holistic health playing a role in this dynamic?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think the employee's personal health, um, it I think it makes a huge difference in their professional performance. I mean, you probably see it a lot when you're working with, um, high performance, like, or high stakes environments, right?
Hmm.
And and the big thing that I notice is that we have to almost treat employees in corporate environments like high performance athletes. Um,
Mm.
they're required to be on, to focus, to perform, to present, and they have to prepare for these things in this way. And I think really strong personal health, um, is a key part of that. I mean, you're not going to eat poorly before your big match, your
Hmm.
big game. And it's the same with work. When people are expected to show up not just for big events, but actually just consistently.
Hmm.
And I think personal health, well, holistic health really looks at that consistency, because we try to prevent things before they're a problem. And you really try to say, well, if you're not showing up consistently, just because you're surviving, it doesn't mean you're really thriving.
Hmm.
If you're thriving, you should be able to show up consistently, no problem. You should be living joyfully in this alignment, and show up with energy, and motivation, focus.
Hmm.
um, and we're not talking about, expecting superhuman results. We're actually just talking about consistency.
Hmm.
um, and I think that, uh, yeah, that when we're talking about holistic health, this includes optimal mental health, emotional health, like we have talked about, but also that physical health. And so if we're able to fine tune and target these aspects, sharpness improves. And this is shown. This is actually shown in a lot of the research. Um, yeah, so I think it's a that's the role.
Hmm. Well, I like the idea of treating employees like high performing athletes, because I think you're right. We often think about optimizing the environment for athletes. And so making sure that the conditions that they're training in every day are optimal for their success. And I'm not sure that we always consider or apply those same sort of ideas into the workplace. On a day-to-day basis. And so, it's kind of interesting to think of it like going to work every day is like practice. And then when you have a big pitch or a presentation, that's your game day.
Yeah.
But in order to have a really successful game, you need to be able to practice effectively throughout the week.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that's a very unique way of positioning it, but I can see how those same strategies applied would be really beneficial for an organization. I know I'm taking a lot of your time today, so I just have two last questions. Do you ever have to, or how do you sort of convince a skeptical corporate leader about the link between professional productivity and personal health? How do you articulate that to them?
That's a really good question. Because sometimes people might not encounter skepticism and think that, that's the status quo. But I think I really try to focus on the research. We have a number of studies that is out there in the literature around the financial aspects. I really start economically. What are the economic benefits of investing in wellness?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is speaking the language of corporate leaders. They have so many stakeholders to consider, so many factors, and at the end of the day, and at least in for-profit settings, we are looking a lot at the economic benefit, and in nonprofit as well, because we don't have a lot of money sometimes in the nonprofit, so we have to we have to be efficient. But there are, I think what we have to demonstrate is that there are short-term, quick benefits.
Mm-hmm.
And this is often missed if we're talking to corporate leaders with, and this is something that I learned early on, that there needs to be tangible benefit in the short term. Mm-hmm. And then you could talk about longer term benefits as well. I think some companies have reported, Harvard Business Review, there was, I think Barry, Mirabito, and Bond, they wrote an article on what's the hard return on employee wellness programs. And they quoted a few cases. One of them was Johnson & Johnson. And they saved the company, the wellness programs cumulatively saved the company $250 million on healthcare costs over the past decade.
Wow.
And from 2002 to 2008, the return was reported in this article at $2.71 for every dollar spent. So that's a fairly good return, 271% return. And then there was another group that worked with, they were a group of doctors. They did a study, I think Milani and Lavi. They did a study at a single employer. They sampled randomly 185 workers and their spouses, and they gave them cardiac rehabilitation and exercise training. That's it. And they weren't necessarily cardiac patients, and medical claim costs went down $1,421 per participant compared to those same claims from the previous year. And the control group that they had did not show this improvement. So in this case, the dollar invested in the intervention or the wellness program yielded about $6 in healthcare savings. So these are kind of financial cases. Mm-hmm. There's also, reports on reduction in attrition rates. So healthier employees, kind of stayed at companies longer. It's a good paper, that one. And there was another study, a large scale study done here in Canada on by Seeley, Dougal Seeley and group it was published in the CMAJ, the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and it showed that naturopathic treatments, just naturopathic treatments in general, reduce risk factors for heart attacks and strokes significantly. And then there was this companion study, in that study, they talked about productivity, and participants not only improved cardiovascular health, but also productivity. And this was with the Canada Post Corporation and the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. So this was a large group of postal workers. So the productivity markers, were financially evaluated, and they had estimated $1,187 per participant in direct savings.
Yeah.
So these are kind of and that one is sort of around naturopathic medicine, it being included in employee wellness and benefit packages as well. So it's not just the wellness program, but these are, I think, big savings for some companies who are spending a lot. So that's usually where I start with.
Yeah. I mean, if I was making a decision about this, I would be looking at the financials as one of the low-hanging fruits too, as well. Sort of understand the benefit of implementing some of these practices beyond what they do for the employee, but also for the company benefit. And then I guess to wrap it up, do you believe corporate leaders should, or what role do you believe that corporate leaders should play in promoting holistic health within their organizations?
Well, I mean, I think, as with many aspects of work, leadership is best when you walk the talk.
Yeah.
So definitely leading in by being healthy themselves, and investing in their own wellness themselves. A lot of folks are in these positions are really invested in more diagnostic strategies. We have a reduction in costs for genetic testing, functional testing. Um, and then there's also the lifestyle aspects, taking appropriate vacations, eating well.
That's true.
And also when we introduce ourselves to people or when we meet new people, we want to be putting our emphasis in conversation or in professional work, I believe, on how well we're doing. As opposed to, yes, I do have this little injury, or I do have, always like pinpoint, instead of shining that that magnifying glass on the negative or the off, try to shine it on the wellness. And I think a lot of corporate leaders probably are already doing this, and so, but I think that's the big role that they could play.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's the walking the talk and do as I do as well. But making sure that the do that they do is something, that is, or our practices or habits that are focusing on wellness. So vacation's a big one. I know a lot of leaders often struggle to take time off themselves. And so, being a good leader by example, I think you're right, is important in order to start from the top down and the bottom up. Well, I just want to say, Dr. Julie, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation today. I think your insights were remarkable, and they remind us of the crucial role that individual well-being plays in reshaping or shaping resilient, effective teams, and by extension, successful organization. To our audience of dedicated leaders and HR professionals, Dr. Julie's strategies invite us to challenge conventional norms and embrace a broader vision of wellness that can significantly elevate performance and employee satisfaction. As we move forward, let's carry with us the lessons learned and consider how a holistic focus on health can transform our approach to leadership and organizational development. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pontoon Reimagine Now. Inspired by today's dialogue, may you find new pathways to foster a culture of well-being and excellence in your organizations. I'm Shannon Robertson, wishing you a journey of discovery and growth, and until we meet again, continue reimagining a workplace where well-being is at the core of your culture.